Welcome, welcome, welcome to being a consciously inclusive leader, talking about how we can create our cultures of belonging within our respective workplaces. But I want to point out that phrasing, consciously inclusive. Several years ago, I was doing an unconscious bias training class. I will tell you who that client or my former boss was. You can probably see it here with that little symbol. Anyway, I'm doing this unconscious bias training, and there was a person in the back of the room very clearly did not want to be there. Do you know how those voluntold folks who were, he was clearly Pat, we'll just call them Pat. That wasn't Pat, but Pat had the exact same look on their face, like they just ate a lemon. Pat did not want to be in Steve's unconscious bias class. So during the break, I walk up to Pat and I say, Pat, looks like there's something on your mind. And Pat says, Steve, you're talking about unconscious bias. I said, that's absolutely correct. Well, if it's unconscious, I can't do anything about it. And Pat gave me a gift that day. And so ever since then, I've been using the more active phrase being consciously inclusive versus unconscious bias. So the Pats of the world don't just throw up their hands and say, I can't do this. We all can do this. We all can be more consciously inclusive. And at its definition, being consciously inclusive is when we make a deliberate or conscious effort to seek out ideas, perspectives, and experiences that differ from the majority and or our own. And so that's the goal here today, is to talk about how we, each and every one of us, can be more consciously inclusive to create more inclusive workspaces as best as we can. As Ashley said, hello, my name is Dr. Steve Iacovelli, pronounced he, him, and his, and I am the owner and principal of Top Dog Learning Group. We do not train dogs unless they are my own. We train humans. We do leadership, change management, and diversity, equity, inclusion training, or now we renamed it belonging and or welcoming because of the world. But I'm also known as the gay leadership dude, so you automatically know that I'm gay, that I self-identify as a dude, but most importantly, I very much like to talk about leadership, especially inclusive leadership as it relates to the workplace. Initially, I wanted to be called the gay Brene Brown. Dr. Brown's people didn't like that so much, cease and desist, so the gay leadership dude was born. There is a handout, a pretty significant one, in your conference stuff, PDF. I do encourage you to feel free to look at it right now and follow along, and I'll refer to it for other stuff. You're experiencing what started as a 60-minute keynote, which is really based on 30 years of doing this kind of stuff, and now it's in 20 minutes. So I had to give you a little bit of extra stuff in that handout, so I do encourage you to seek that out afterwards or now. But we talk about unconscious bias, and I know, given who's in the audience, that's a very common topic within our workplaces. But I like to always think about unconscious bias kind of as a slab of granite. New shiny human comes out, and they have a big square of rock in their virtual head about anything you can have out there. And I'll give you a quick example. Little Stevie, circa 1980 something, and what his perception of what a scientist, quote unquote, should be. Little Stevie turns on the TV in the mid 80s, and there's a scientist on Magnum PI or whatever. What did that scientist look like? What do you think? Lab coat, middle-aged white dude. Yeah, so drip. On the slab of granite, on little Stevie's perception on what a scientist should look like, there's one data point, one drip. Time goes on, little Stevie goes to the movies, watches the 1980-something James Bond flick. Who's the scientist in the Bond movies? Q, thank you very much for Quartermaster, if you did not know that. Q looked like what in the 80s? You can rinse and repeat what I just said a few minutes ago. Yeah, middle-aged white dude, drip, drip, drip. Little Stevie goes to his 7th grade chemistry class. Remember very distinctly, who's standing in front of that room? Middle-aged white dude, Mr. Jarvie, I remember him, he was also my tennis coach. But these are all data points that are, those little drips of water are going on that slab of granite. And if you know water and rock, over time, with enough drips, it starts to erode in shape, yes. Now, I will say, of course, that my slab of granite and what a scientist should look like wasn't impacted by this, but we all have these slabs of granite in our heads for all the experiences out there. So the big question we want to ask ourselves is not, do we have bias? Because if you are here and you're breathing, you have some. It's more like, which ones do we have? We get biases, those drips of water, from all different sources. The people around us, the media we consume, what our friends think, the era where we were brought up and born, all that good stuff. So we need to ask ourselves, which ones do we have? And why does this matter? Well, if you think about it, as we go into our workplaces and we strive to make them more inclusive, ultimately being more consciously inclusive leads to a workplace where people feel that sense of belonging and they feel that sense of trust. And that ultimately leads to workplace success. So we could define success any way we'd like. It could be employee engagement, it could be the bottom line, whatever that looks like. We know there's data, a lot of data, on what it takes that if we are consciously inclusive, we have better work outcomes. And we want to talk about that here for the remaining 15 minutes or so. Well, how do we do that? We do it through a three-pronged strategy. We can think in, we can speak up, and we can act out. So let's kind of dissect these a little bit in our remaining time. Let's think about think in. Well, think in is really just looking inward and saying, me as a leader, what potential unconscious biases do I have that might get in the way, or how can I be more consciously inclusive? So I'm going to give you 3 strategies to start on how you can think in about your own actions, your own thoughts, your own behaviors. The very first one, anyone here familiar with Project Implicit? Couple head bobs. If you're not, no worries. Project Implicit is a free assessment online that in 1998, 3 researchers, Drs. Benashie, Nosek, and Greenwald, said, can we measure potential unconscious biases in a human? And I'm using my phrases very, very specifically. Potential unconscious biases, potential. It's not saying that you take this assessment online and you're a blankist, no. It says, hey, you might have a propensity to have a bias for or against this group depending on what assessment you take. So it's a great place to start. It's not a be-all, end-all. There's some really interesting research that kind of questions or just nudges the efficacy or how good or valid the instrument is. But I love using it because it's just a great starting point for us to start to explore or uncover what potential unconscious biases we may have. Because once we know them, then we can de-bias ourselves, and that's actually a real word. The second strategy for thinking is extending our comfort zone, and I'll tell you a quick story. Years ago, obviously I worked at Disney, which you saw the ears, but I was also an IBMer for a while. And I remember as I'm being an IBM consultant, I was really interested to understand the challenges my female colleagues were facing. So I joined the Women's Employee Resource Group. And I wasn't there to be the male savior, I'll solve your problems. No, I was there to listen and understand. And you know what? That felt a little weird in a good way, because now I'm hearing some of the real reasons why my female colleagues had some challenges in the greater work environment and work context. I was like, wow, thank you, now I know. What can you do to put yourself in that position, maybe for a demographic you're not necessarily part of? Now, given your roles, that may be hard to just jump into another ERG you're not a part of, but maybe it's outside of work to put yourself in that uncomfortable position to expand your perspectives. The third is talking about mindfulness. If you're not familiar with mindfulness, mindfulness is the act of deliberately noticing new things, being present, and considering new perspectives in a non-judgmental manner, or the essence of enlightenment. That's Dr. Ellen Langer, the mother of mindfulness, if you will. So it's kind of training yourself either through apps, through other things, to get out of your own head and kind of get, I call it drone perspective. You know, drones, they're so cool, they kind of hover, but they're looking down at the whole situation or context. What can we do in order to practice mindfulness so that when we just leave that meeting and you sit there and reflect, wow, why did I say it that way? Or you're in that situation, why did I cross the street then? What does that look like, and start to understand your own behaviors through the practice of mindfulness. So just 3 ways that we can think in about ourselves to be more consciously inclusive. Let's talk about the speak up. And with that, I'll kind of give another quick story. I'm in a conference room very similar to this one, and you see the 2 chairs at the end that sitting there, a little glary, but right here at the head of the table is a senior executive of this project. And it's myself, one of my top doggers, which is what I call my consultants, and 38 other folks from this client partner project. And it's the end of the project. Everyone's all excited. We're doing an inclusive leadership thing, and we're just about to start the meeting, and the voices are dying down, and you hear that senior executive say, well, you know how all women drive, right? Silence. Everybody in the room just kind of stopped. It was like one of those John Hughes record screeches things. And we just kind of looked. But no one said a word to that executive, male executive, which is important to the story, of course. And at that moment, every single one of us was engaging in what's called silent collusion. You may or may not be familiar with that term, but silent collusion is the practice of neither supporting nor defending the rights of others to be fully included in the workplace. So when someone says those disparaging remarks, we don't step up and say anything. If you're not paying attention to what I'm saying today, don't do this. Don't engage in silent collusion, especially if you want to create a more consciously inclusive workplace. Why? Because people are watching you. People are always watching each other. And if I say, you know, something is said and Steve doesn't say anything, people are like, wow, Steve didn't defend me, or didn't defend my group, or just didn't defend others. And you can undermine or erode trust when you do that. And trust is the absolute golden standard when it comes to effective leadership. So how can we beat silent collusion in those moments? Well, with the help of this guy. Anyone know what kind of dog, this is Sam, by the way. Anyone know what kind of dog Sam is? What's that? Not a sheepdog, you're close though. Hungarian pulley mop. Like if you put a little stick around Sam, you can clean your floors. Yeah, it's a Hungarian pulley mop, or a mop dog for short. So if I take Sam's name and I take Sam's breed, we get Mop Sam. Now I will time out and say this is wicked cheesy, I know. And if you get to know me, I'm dad jokey kind of thing. But when you're in those live moments when someone says a disparaging comment like, well, you know, women drive, sometimes it's very disalarming, especially if you're on the receiving end of that. You want to have something in your back pocket that you can throw out, and that's what Mop Sam is. Now I'm not going to go into the details of the me, Al, point, say, ask, move, just because I got 20 minutes here. But I will say that in the handout, there's a lot of details on these 6 strategies. There's pros and cons to each one, very contextual as well. And there's even a link to a free online mini training that we do. We call them Learning Tapas, a Top Dog Learning Group, because they're bite-sized nuggets of learning. But just a way for you and those around you to kind of get used to it. But I'll go through 3 examples of Mop Sam to kind of give you a taste or give you an example. The first is the first M in Mop Sam, and that M stands for me. You ask yourself, am I personally impacted by that statement that's being said? And so in this case, if I was a female colleague in the room and Bob, we'll say Bob is the executive that's sitting there, and Bob says that disparaging comment, I might reply and say, well, as a woman, Bob, I find that statement to be inaccurate. I consider myself a very good driver. So what you're doing in that particular instance is you're using yourself as Exhibit A to refute the statement being said. So again, you can see how there's context here. You know, I'm not a female colleague, so I couldn't use this particular strategy. So maybe I would use the S. S is say. You say a non-word that at the very minimum, very least, indicates that I don't agree with what Bob is saying. And so it sounds like, whoa, what? Damn, huh? So the good thing, and insert whatever you want as appropriate would be to the workplace, of course. This one's good because at least to those around me, it's very much known if I go, damn, what do you know about how I feel about that statement Bob just said? Yeah, I'm not there. I don't agree with Bob, right. But it's not me addressing Bob directly. So yeah, again, pros and cons with each one, but at least this one gets us halfway there to the end goal. The A in Mop Sam is simply ask. You just ask the person what they meant. Hey, Bob, what did you mean by that statement? Now, it's not, Bob, what did you mean by that statement? Same words, but my rate of speech, my intonation, my inflection tells a different story. So, and that's kind of the case with not just this one, but most of these as well, is that when you say it, make sure it's in that neutral tone, non-accusatory. Jason Sudeikis yesterday said about the curiosity thing. Yeah, that's where this comes into play. Bob, what did you mean by that statement? And then you pause. And most likely Bob has been saying these negative things, a lot of people do, out of that unconscious bias. And so what you're doing is you're pulling that unconscious idea into the consciousness, and usually this is when Bob backpedals and all that good stuff. So that's the A. So me, Al, point, say, ask, move. So you can explore the other 3 as well, but have these in your back pocket. Find the ones that work best for you so that in those live moments, you can refute what's being said and create that more inclusive space by speak up. Now let's talk about the act out. And if I take a step back from these concepts, think in is about you. Speak up, of course, is about kind of those around you in that immediate circle, where the act out is really about your overall workplace, your overall enterprise. And there is no other audience I would love to speak to about this one than y'all, as we say in Orlando. Because you have a very unique and awesome position within your workplace to help shape a lot of this and lead some of these initiatives. So what can you do to act out? I'm gonna give you 4 strategies. You will see there's a little legal asterisk up at the top right, because these are just a starting point. But 4 categories, 4 areas for us to start to think through where we can act out to create a more inclusive workplace, consciously inclusive workplace within our world. The first is workplace education. What are you formally doing and informally doing to educate your team members, and that'll be my generic term for employees, to help them be more consciously inclusive? Are you weaving some of these concepts into your onboarding information? Do you have some sort of unconscious bias conversations during your leadership training programs? What do they look like beyond maybe just a side note? When I worked at Disney, I worked at Disney Cruise Line, and I would sometimes do what I call a ship dip, where I would run aboard the ships and dunk the crew in training and I'd run away. Now that's not really a good way to change human behavior. So instead of the ship dips that you might be doing, what are you doing to really prolong that exposure so people really practice these kinds of skills? Next is workplace or artifacts. What do I mean by artifacts? What is on your website when you are representing, say, a family? Is it a different family, or is it some of the same standard reinforcing of concepts that we often see? You have that training PowerPoint slide, and they're talking about leadership in general. What's that leader look like on that PowerPoint slide? All these little artifacts are sending messages that either we want to enforce or we want to refute. And so we need to really analyze what those artifacts looks like. I was actually at a client several years ago about to do one of our inclusive leadership programs, and got the room set up, and the training room was right off of the lobby of the main office. So I just walked around the lobby, and I'm looking up, and there's these 4 huge black and white photos of it was an engineering firm, real engineering folks doing engineering stuff. And what do you think I saw in all 4 of those pictures? Perceived male, perceived white, and around about the same age-ish. Kind of making a point. I'm like, not a lot of diversity there. So go into the training room, students come in, and I said, don't sit down, friends. Let's go for a field trip. They're like, all right. So we go around, we walk around the lobby, and look around, we get back into the training room, we sit down, and I say, what did you see? And this woman says, we have a lot of work to do. I'm like, yes, fantastic, yay. What are the things in your workplace saying or not saying about your inclusivity or what that looks like? Next is one that's probably near and dear to many of your hearts, and that's structures and systems. Policies fall under here as well. What do they look like, and are they as inclusive as possible? And those can be big things and small things. I was, several years ago, it's not that long ago actually, I was paddleboarding with a friend of mine. She was a senior executive of HR. We're just best friends. She was actually my mentor at one point at Disney, and she kind of went on her way. So we're sitting paddleboarding in Orlando, and she's like, oh, I wanted to tell you, we changed our bereavement policy to include non-human family members. And I had to stop, and I felt seen. I wasn't even part of the company, but I don't have kids, human kids in this lifetime, but I have canine kids. And when I lost my canine daughter, I was devastated. And I felt, oh my gosh, you honor my definition of family. That's awesome. And I said, well, how much did that cost the business? She's like, it costed like nothing, really. Is anyone abusing that? No. Like, that's a small change that could have big impact. What else can you do in your workplace to really help the systems and structures? And last but not least is accountability. How are you holding yourselves, how are you holding senior executives accountable to be more consciously inclusive? I throw under accountability is, what does feedback look like within your workplace? Do you have a feedback-rich culture? Are people comfortable providing that effective feedback to others? Do you have some standard model that people can use to have feedback be a good type of feedback or not? Versus like, you're always late. Okay, what does that mean? Like, hey, when you were late last week, ... Specifics. How are you holding folks to be accountable to be more consciously inclusive? So 4 areas for you to play around with. Again, legal asterisk, just a starting point. Whew. Quick 20 minutes, right? Think in, speak up, act out. So you now have 3 areas of focus and 3 specific strategies you can take back to try to create a more inclusive workplace that you have. Now, your challenge, of course, is to begin to incorporate these into your behavior, share those within your workplace, and then really help them be part of your cultural DNA. Now, in the workbook, there are several resources that I've listed. I will be completely transparent. I do get a kickback for one, because that's one of my books. But these are just ones I found of value during my journey about inclusivity, and I encourage you to play around with those as well. Now, get out your cameras. If you missed anything, here's a QR code to allow you to you get on a website and get access to the same PDF, but I wrote in all the notes for you. So if you're like, oh, I missed that concept, Steve, there you go. That way you didn't have to like write on your phone or download it and all that good stuff as well. So while anyone else need it? Because I got a whole 1 minute left. All right, keep going, keep going, keep going. If not, then I can put it back up later. All right. So just to finish up things, consciously inclusive leaders, by being good allies, know when to stand in front of, stand next to, and stand behind the group they're being an ally for. And at its very basics, being consciously inclusive is being a good ally for any folks within your workplace, doesn't matter the definition. So thank you so much, my friends. Have a great rest of the conference. If there's anything I can do for you, I'll stay up here for a few moments. I am doing a book signing after this. One of my books called Your Queer Career is actually in the bookstore. And so I'm going to, right next to the bookstore, going to do a book signing in about 20 minutes, I think it is or so. But otherwise, take care and thank you so much for your time and energy, and be inclusive leaders. Thank you.